What's up, everybody? Sleepy Mills here, waking the freak up to drop this patch note 2.01 that just got randomly patched on a freaking Thursday? I don't even know what day it is. But regardless, Riot dropped a brand new patch 2.01 out of nowhere, and it comes with a lot of changes to the map split, to Jet, and even more changes about AFKing and all kinds of crazy stuff. So we're gonna break it all down so that you know what to expect in this crazy patch, so make sure you watch it to the end. But go to the Game Leap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced VOD reviews, tips and tricks, map guides, agent courses. I mean, we got it on the Game Leap website, so check it out in the description down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, basically, at the very beginning of the patch, Riot talks about the fact that this patch is mainly targeted at overhauling Split, which is one of the most controversial maps right now that has an insanely high defensive win rate, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And then the second part of this is the continuation of the controller role balance, but the actual character that is going to get balanced is not a controller, which is interesting. It's actually Jet. So we're going to jump right in to the agent changes, and Jet is the only character that got changed, but this is a pretty sizable change. Jet got her smoke duration decreased from 7 to 4.5. Now, basically, Riot had this to say about the situation. In a continuation of the controller changes from patch 2.0, we felt it was important to consider Jet smokes as well. In patch 1.0, we increased Jet smoke's duration from 7 seconds from the 4 seconds, and we are partially undoing that now. And just for reference, it's now 4.5, so that's just 0.5 more than it was originally. Then they go on to say, we found that the result of the change was that Jet became a substitute for the controller role, and reasonably aggressive teams could make use of her cloudburst smokes to quickly take space without relying on dedicated controller. This is a part of a pattern of duelists superseding more utility-focused agents that we will be continuing to look at in the future. It's important that Jet can use her smokes to create temporary windows for the high-action play that define her style, but those windows need to be brief enough to ensure that controllers are where teams look for team-focused vision blocking. Now, what Riot is saying here is actually something that has been happening quite a bit, and maybe even in your ranked games you experienced it, where you don't have a controller, so you like run onto site on, let's say, A on Ascent, and you smoke off closable doors, you smoke off Heaven, you dash in, and your team pushes onto point, you clear site, and now you didn't really need a controller, but you still managed to take that site. Well, now, because of the decreased time, it's going to be a lot harder to do so because one of your smokes is going to fade by the time your team start walking in, and that's going to be a window of opportunity for your enemies. Now, that being said, don't fret. This is actually something that is kind of a nerf, but in some ways it makes Jet more usable in some instances, and let me explain. You see, before, Jet smokes were really good at peeking one-way angles. It was amazing where, let's say you're challenging Hookah, right? And you know there's the left and there's the right, and you can't challenge them both at the same time, but if you have two people, you could definitely challenge them both, or if you have a flash, it works really well. But when you add a 7-second smoke, you smoke off one side, you check the other side, there's no one there, and now you have a smoke that's just gonna sit up for a little while until it actually disappears, but now it's going to disappear in that 4.5 seconds, so it's actually a lot better at checking 50-50 angles, which is one of the benefits of it now, but overall, it's still probably gonna be weaker because you can't use that team-based aspect of the smoke, plus you just can't rely on it as much for like smoking off a point and then walking around your smoke because it can fade. You're gonna have to have some speed in your step so that you don't end up getting caught out where your smoke dies down and an enemy's just holding that angle when you're trying to walk by. Now, that being said, will this change Jet's position in the meta? Most likely not. Will this make Jet all of a sudden trash? Most likely not. And I'm gonna go on record and say that this is not gonna change Jet's position at all. I mean, it's a quality of life change, and in ranked, you're gonna see a lot less Jets working as controllers when no one wants to pick one. But it's not like pro teams were not playing any controllers anyways. They always were, and Jet is still very powerful now, and it's not because of her cloud smoke, it's because of her tailwind. So don't worry, you Jet mains, she's not all of a sudden F tier. Now, before we move on to the split changes, there's actually some really interesting words in the paragraph that I read about how Riot is going to balance for the future, and it's really good for us to know this because we can see what Riot is going to be looking at. So they specifically said this statement again. They said, this is part of a pattern of duelists superseding more utility-focused agents that we will continue to look at in the future. And that is a very important statement right there, because it talks about how they are going to be balancing the game and some problem that they have noticed. Essentially, they want to have legitimate strengths and weaknesses for every single role and try to create it so there's not too much overlap or characters that are just being able to do what another role can already do. And you're already seeing this a lot, specifically with duelists, where it seems they just keep making duelist after duelist after duelist, and a lot of these duelists have stall abilities like a sentinel, or like Jet had a smoke ability like a controller, and they want to make sure that characters in a specific role have differences, of course, but they do not take the job of a character in another role. And I think that Riot is trying to make it so that at the very least there is one of each role on every single team, or there are strengths and weaknesses specifically defined for each role, and it promotes role diversity. So I think going forward we cannot expect there to be like the 5 duelist meta. I know a lot of people meme it, but honestly it seemed like that could happen. I mean, if they made a duelist that had some smoke capabilities and then all of a sudden now why would you want to play anything else? But it looks like that Riot is really going to make sure that they balance the game in a way where every single role is going to at the very least be feasible and powerful at what they do, and you're not going to find a different role actually be so overpowered at doing something that another role is known for. Now moving on to the map updates we have to talk about, where Split just got dramatically changed in a crazy way. And for those of you who don't know, Split was one of those maps that had the highest defense win percentage differential, where the defense side on Split had an overwhelming advantage, and we all knew that Split was going to see some big changes going forward, and they went really big, but let's break them all down. So basically Riot says that a lot of these changes are going to reduce the 50-50 checks on attack and the depth of certain corners, so we're going to really break them down. And the first one we're going to talk about is they increased the width of the B main doorway. They made it much larger and they just added a box instead. This is a very, very interesting change. You see, sometimes pushing through this is a complete nightmare, especially when you start talking about things like tripwires or killjoy utility. This could be a freaking terrible place to push through. Not to mention enemies could be hiding in the back left, in the back right behind pillar, in the direct right, or in the direct left, or on the top left boxes. I mean, there's just so many damn places that you have to check here, not to mention rafters and heaven, and it just goes on and on and on. Very, very difficult. And the fact that they opened this up, the increased field of view is going to make it easier to refrag each other. It's going to be easier to see where enemies are coming from, and of course it's just going to be easier to funnel through this as a team. Now on top of that, they also changed it so where there is an actual little trash pile on the top of B main. You can see it right here in the picture, where now enemies can't hide super deep in the corner, so it's just one less corner that you have to worry about. The thing is, the area is so wide that if you go to the far right when you're pushing in on attack, you're going to be able to see enemies tucked in that corner if you push forward enough, and you don't have to swing all the way out of that corner to see if enemies are tucked in there, which is absolutely fantastic, because that's just one of those angles that if you don't check with utility and an enemy is hiding in there, you might just get rolled, because there's so many other places you have to watch, and you really don't want to have to swing out, look at this angle, and then just submit yourself to all other angles. Now moving on to the next change, and this one's actually crazy. They increased the spike plant zone boundary, where now you can plant on the site in an area that can be directly contested from B main. This is gonna make B main such a powerful place to hold, and I wouldn't be surprised if enemies are going to need to flank B main and take control of it if they want to take control of the site, or of course smoke it off. Now the next thing they changed on B is they actually added a brand new double boxes right here that is gonna make it a lot harder for enemies to be able to effectively see you without submitting themselves to multiple angles as well. And like it says, it breaks up the vertical 50-50 angle when peeking into sight from B main. And the changes go on and on. Look at this, they reduced the depth of this corner to allow pushing into the defender spawn with more safety, because how many times have you pushed here and you don't know if enemies are on the left or the right, so you have to 50-50 it? Well, this is one of the changes. When you push up, you're going to be able to see if an enemy is hiding on the left, and they're not going to be able to hide that, so you don't have to be afraid, and it's really, really nice if I'm being honest. Now, once again, they cut out another 50-50 angle in the back of CT, and this is just gonna make pushing through CT all the easier, and I'm really liking how they're trimming up this map, because that was one of the big problems and complaints about Split, is that these angles were so frequent and so deep that it was very difficult to like counter someone that is just like standing around the corner with a shotgun or a stinger or something like that. And you should not have to use utility through every single location on the map, because that's just impossible, and it just made these really frustrating frustrating angles where you had no way to possibly get through them all without actually getting killed. Now moving away from B side, look at this mid door change. This is absolutely crazy. They increased the width of the vent room entrance. This is really interesting because as you're gonna see in the next change, they actually added a sloped wall in vent room, which removes that 50-50 again when entering vents from mid. This is gonna make vents a lot more difficult to hold, and you see a lot of times enemies would push up to vent, but they wouldn't push through it because there was way too many angles that enemies could hide in, and they would actually go up to take heaven B. But now it looks like this is gonna be a much more usable rotation path going forward. Now as another change that's just cleaning up the map, they simplified the ramen area, and it says here that this should make the map feel more open and allow you to push through and clear this area without having to rely as heavily on utility, which is amazing. It just goes back to what I was talking about before, where now you can actually clear a lot of these angles with gunplay, and you do not have to freaking use utility just walking through mid or trying to execute a simple flank, and I really like a lot of these changes so far. Now the next change, they reduced the depth in sewers, so it's a lot easier for you to contest both angles, just very similar to a lot of the other changes, just bettering these 50-50s. And then moving on to the A side, they increased the width of the doorway to A tower and reduced safety of defenders in A tower. And this is a very nice change because this really felt all clogged up here. Not only does this look cleaner, but it actually gives you legitimate reason to control A ramps, and a lot of time teams would send one person just to play A ramps passively, or they wouldn't even try to take A ramps at all. But now having A ramps gives you a really clear view of heaven, which is really nice, and I think that people are going to be fighting for it a lot more. Now the next change is actually on A site, where they adjusted the angle of the sloped wall, which is going to be a lot easier for attackers to see you now because the angle isn't as deep, so people can't hide in that angle, which is going to be nice for attackers, because before, if you wanted to see someone that was hiding in that direct angle, you actually had to swing all the way out on site, which could submit you to a lot of other angles. So it's just going to be a lot easier for attackers to clear this side of the point and fight for point control. Now last but certainly not least, on A site, now you can no longer hide in this corner anymore. They adjusted the wall depth near screens, which allows you to move out of screens more safely without the use of utility. And I'm sure all of you have been in this scenario where you want to play for a retake, for instance, and when you're trying to re-enter site, there's one corner to the right of you, there's rafters, there's under hell, and there's to the left of you as well, and it's just very difficult if you don't have any form of utility. Well, now it's going to be easier for you to dip or walk to the left side without submitting yourself to the right side angle, which is really nice, honestly. But this is kind of a buff to defender's side, which is a little bit different than all the rest of the changes on the map. But overall, I wanted to talk about these changes because this honestly might make Split my favorite map, because this fixed a lot of the problems I had with Split, and I think that this really goes against some of the philosophy that the Riot developers or the Riot map makers had before. And if you don't remember that conversation, I mean, it was a really long time ago, but basically there was like a lot of people coming out and saying that the design in Riot was trash, and Riot defended that, saying, oh, well, we have so much more dynamic utility, so that's why our angles are deeper. That's why you have a lot of 50-50s, because you need to be using utility to take these angles. And yes, there is some merit to that, but the problem is it was way overblown, at least on Split, for instance. I think Riot is really getting into their groove about the balance of map design, where yes, some angles need to be 50-50'd and you need to use utility to take them safely, but not every angle should be like that. And if you make every angle like that, then it really taxes utility in a way that is not fun and can lead to some really frustrating moments, and even more importantly, a really dominant defensive side, because there is just not enough utility to go around. I really like how they're cleaning this up to where, yeah, you could save your utility for the important moments and you don't have to use it around every single rotation and every single push, no matter where you're going, and you don't have to burn up all your utility just pushing the very front of B or the very front of mid. And I really love these changes, but as per usual, I want to know your opinion about all of them in the comments down below. Now, there are a lot of really minor changes, but one of the bigger ones that I really wanted to talk about at the end is the Q restrictions for AFKing in-game and during pre-game has specifically changed. Now, they said this: we want to make sure that folks having connectivity issues aren't harshly penalized, but those who are purposely AFKing receive harsher penalties. With that, we will be adding AFK forgiveness for a certain number of rounds, but repeated/extended occurrences will be penalized with higher Q restrictions. And I think this is really great news for most of of us who are not AFKing on purpose, because harsher penalties just means less AFKing, because either one, they're actually just having really high Q restrictions because they can't play the game, or two, they are disincentivized from doing it because they realize there'll be harsher penalties. Either way, less AFKing, I think, is good for all of us who want to take the game seriously. But go to the Game Leap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced VODs. We got upcoming map guides where we're going to be breaking down all the things you can do on the new map split and much, much more. So do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please follow me on Twitter at CoachMillsOW. But I love your faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.